And so what you realize when you have a 56,000 person team is there's no such thing as um, perfection, and there's no such thing as everything going the way you hope it will.
Welcome to Coffee with Mr. IoT, a weekly chat with Robert Schmidt, Deloitte's chief futurist, and the builders, dreamers, founders, and wild children of the IoT universe. This podcast can also be viewed on the Coffee with Mr. IoT YouTube channel.
Hello, my name is Robert Schmidt. I am Deloitte's chief futurist, also known as Mr. IoT. Today on my Coffee with Mr. IoT, I actually was told I might have to rename it Smoothie with Mr. IoT. But
True.
Today, as a guest, I have Dan Helfrich. He's the CEO and chairman of Deloitte Consulting. But actually, you like to be called the captain of Deloitte Consulting. Welcome to the show, Dan. How are you doing?
Robert, it's interesting times, but I'm happy to be with you, and that's the best shirt I've seen today so far.
Thank you. I have to tell you, my wife made fun of me because I put real pants on for you. But other than that, yes. Thank you. So Dan, how are you doing? How's your family doing? We are in weird times, as you said, and there's a lot of people who are sick or troubled or so forth. How are you doing?
Personally, I feel fortunate above all else. And then physically and health-wise, I feel energized. There are days where the time doesn't go by very quickly and the week doesn't go by very quickly, as I know lots are experiencing. But I will tell you, I haven't spent this much time with my wife and my 4 kids on a continuous basis in a long, long time. And I'm trying to cherish every single second of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. My wife said to me, this might be the longest time we've been together in one piece with all the travel I do. I find myself in this sort of, I appreciate exactly what you're saying. I'm like in a great place. I love my place where I'm at. And then there's always this undertone, this sort of like little darkness under it. Someone actually said to me that works with you, you're the eternal optimist. How do you do it? What do you do?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd call myself an eternal optimist, because when I hear people called that, at times that means that they fail to understand reality. And I absolutely understand the reality of the conditions around me at all times. And the conditions around us right now as a society, as a business community, are serious. And we can't make light of that or find optimism that's misplaced. Now, the part of eternal optimist that I will, accept as feedback or as a moniker is I absolutely believe that there are opportunities, even in situations that are dire, to create growth for people, to create growth for companies, to make an impact on society. And I'm always trying to find those in every situation, but not at the expense of confronting the realities of what the world has put in front of us.
I gotta say, it's interesting, right? We come into these situations. You became CEO or the captain of us like not quite a year ago. And, I'm sure you didn't expect to be sitting here now in this situation. And so I've noticed when I am in situations like this, where there's something really extraordinary, something you didn't plan for, I find out things about myself I didn't know. What's something you found out about yourself in this situation that you didn't know, that you didn't expect, that was a surprise, something like that?
I haven't, to be honest, thought about it that way. My life and my career has been filled with unexpected moments and twists and turns, and I've found myself able to adjust to those circumstances pretty quickly. And look, you try to listen, you try to observe the environment around you, try to gather lots of facts from a wide variety of people, you try to take counsel from a wide variety of people, and then you try to prioritize what set of decisions need to go first. And that same set of philosophies, approaches, management techniques, whatever you want to call them, are pretty instinctive to me. And they're just being applied in a global pandemic, which I never would have expected I would have had to face, but the the instincts I'm drawing upon are actually pretty familiar.
That's interesting to hear how, instinct versus, you say this in some of your talks. I find this super fascinating for all the leaders I've met and had in my life, working for various companies. You and I have met through email and now on this call. And I know so much personal things about you, more than I've known about any leader. And I've actually heard this back from other people. So I want to just say thanks for that, because people actually recognize how you give us some of the truth, or give us the truth that you know, and then you also give us some of the personal stuff. For example, I hope your son and his gashes are fine. It's just, you shared this on one of our calls.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. Just one comment on that. I was talking to someone, and someone from outside the firm who, knows enough about us and knows enough about me, and he said, it's rare that someone attempts to scale relatability. And it was an interesting thing for me to think about. I've never intentionally tried to scale my relatability, but I have consistently tried, no matter the responsibility I have at the moment, to be authentically me, which means sharing of myself and my family and the little things that happen in day-to-day life. And that probably is a little different than the way most people go about it.
Well, it's fascinating, right? Because you said before that you rely a lot on your instincts around this and they come natural to you. So this whole concept of scaling sounds very rational, sounds very brainy, and maybe that's not even how you think about it.
It's not at all. And the nice thing is, if you only have to have one personality and you only have to have one talk track, life's a lot simpler. And what I see people doing, and this is, in society writ large with my clients, others, and at times in the firm, you're trying to balance multiple personas and multiple narratives and talk tracks depending on the audience. And for me, that sounds really hard. And so the more I can have a single way of thinking about where I am in the moment, a single way of being, it's a lot less of a burden.
And was this always the way you felt about it, or is this something you learned over time?
Oh,
It took me to get into my late 40s to really actually own that shirt, which is, it's an expression of me being different, right? And so I'm curious, what was it for you?
yeah, I think it has evolved. I mean, I went to grad school as a 20-year-old when I was still playing undergraduate soccer at Georgetown, and I sort of graduated early and got myself into grad school, and I was, a 20-year-old wearing shin guards to an MBA program, and I had to be comfortable being myself in an environment where there weren't others that looked like me at all. And I didn't conform to a lot of the norms of behavior, the norms of demographic of that environment. And so, experiences like that have probably made that simpler.
I mean, this is really diversity, right? This is owning your diversity and being part of the diversity. And I got to tell you, one of the reasons I'm at Deloitte, and I'm back at Deloitte, I'm actually a boomerang. I left, was an executive at a gaming company, and now I'm back. But the reason I came the first time and the second time was because I always feel out of place, and I felt being out of place at Deloitte is okay. Talk a little bit about this. I know you've talked about diversity to other folks, but it's sort of interesting to hear it related from you.
Yeah, if there's anything I want us to be, it is the most inclusive and most diverse workplace that exists in our industry. And I do believe deeply that white men who've grown up with fortune and circumstances that their demographics have afforded them, like me, if you put diversity at the top of the agenda and you really believe it, that you can be, I can be major catalysts of major change for good. And I think about that all the time. Look, diversity is very personal to me. I come from a large family. I'm the oldest of seven. We have a multiracial family by way of adoption. It's a fascinating environment, and I've learned from a very early age the value of different perspectives and the fact that there are others based on their demographics that have not had the fortune that I have. And paying it forward is about creating opportunity and investing in people to sort of equalize the playing field. And I think that's incredibly important.
I was at some weekend workshop and there was a diversity conversation and they set up this line in the middle of the room and then they asked questions. And if you answered with yes, you step forward, and with no, you step back. And there were questions like, did you grow up with your parents together? Do you have health insurance? You know, very basic questions. I really didn't relate to it. And then at the end of this thing, I stood almost at the front of the room and I looked back and I was like, okay, I physically got it, what it meant to be privileged. And it was sort of a really interesting experience, not just to get it here, but kind of.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. I want to ask you about something, maybe I'll shift a little bit. You talk about convene and detonate, and that was one of the two things I really thought was interesting. And you talked about this in October of last year. And I wanted to sort of like hear from you. Do you feel similarly? Do you feel different? In particular, I'm curious, maybe almost like, what are you sort of, I don't know what the right word is, not happy, but what are you sort of like actually seeing that detonates today because of what's going on that's going to benefit us?
Yeah, I do. Look, we have a 56,000-ish person team. And so what you realize when you have a 56,000 person team is there's no such thing as perfection, and there's no such thing as everything going the way you hope it will. So when you're thinking about major change, like in my case, you talk about the word detonate, I've made a big emphasis on let's take traditional orthodoxies, habits, the status quo, and let's really challenge why they exist and whether or not they have a place in our future. And I absolutely do see, Robert, examples all over the country and all over the world. When I go see a project team and they say, we saw one of your videos talking about detonating orthodoxies, and we realized we've been doing this same monthly status report and the same monthly status meeting the same way with our clients. And we realized that it was adding incredibly little value, and it was a routine that consumed time and effort and created no value. And because you helped us challenge that orthodoxy, we got rid of it. That, to me, if I can replicate those micro changes, then over time, you get a groundswell of change in the culture and the approach. Now, there's clearly other things at a macro level that we're challenging in terms of fundamental business processes about how you run a large firm. But my view is that you get a groundswell from the bottom up, you do some stuff top down to reinforce it, and that creates the kind of change. And so I am happy because I'm seeing that stuff happen all over the place. And yet, as I said at the beginning, you know you're never done because you can always find examples where it isn't happening yet.
So give us an example that we might not have heard, something that might surprise us, almost like sort of like, what can I tease out of you now that's sort of like a little interesting tidbit for us, a detonation you might call.
Well, we're detonating the concept of a tier 1 university for campus recruiting. You know, we like to talk about tier 1 equals a certain set of schools, and those certain set of schools, frankly, have a set of attributes for the most part that, in my mind, can exclude people who don't have, who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, who can't afford those prestigious institutions. And we're challenging what's the roster of places where we can acquire talent. we're detonating the way we think about the future of technology architects and solution architects in this firm. I would argue that the Renaissance management consultant who has an MBA, who might have looked like the most important part of our future 10 years ago, who might have looked like me, is still important, but perhaps not as important as the greatest technical and solution architect who's knitting together these enterprise programs and systems we're doing for our clients. And so we have to detonate the way we think about talent models and the way we think about performance management and the way we think about compensation and rewards, the way we think about titling for that generation and type of person. So those are some of the fun ones that we're in the midst of dealing with.
I thought I was personally affected by when you talked about the university part. I have two sons. One goes to a university, the other one decided not to. And I really had to sort of catch myself in supporting both of them the same way with all my enthusiasm, because I love them both. I'm really proud of both of them. Yet one decided to do something totally different from what kind of feels normal and comfortable to me. So
yeah,
it's interesting you talked about that.
It's a great example.
So I want to ask you about that technical thing, right? My passion really is using good tech and putting it to good use. And then I try creative things. I don't know. I'm gonna do a self-promotion. Have you ever seen Dub Dub? Did you know that we created a Deloitte comic book?
I have. I Dub Dub, and I love the stuff we've done with Ella the Engineer. The comic books we've done there focused on women in STEM in particular. So yeah, comic books are the rage.
Well, it's something you can send someone. I always give someone two books. I say one for you and for one someone do you want to give it to. But I guess my question around this is you talk about sort of the Renaissance man and the solution man. If I think of myself more as the solution man, I always find it takes me 3 sentences more than it takes you to get to the point. How do I sort of like put myself forward best as the solution, the technology man, and where we all together in the mission and so forth? What do you recommend?
Well, two things. One, I would never call you the Renaissance man or the solution man. I'd call you the person or the consultant or something, because I wouldn't use that that pronoun. Two things. One, I do think that one of the skills in that we have the greatest scarcity of in the world is effective, concise, memorable communicators, either in writing or verbally. And there are things you can do. I tell people all the time, take improv classes because they help you listen and be articulate in moments and to live in the moment. That can be really effective in terms of communicating. So that's the first thing, is investing in your own communication capacity is absolutely worth it. That being said, we have to change the paradigm for what a well-rounded consultant looks like. And maybe there are going to be people who absolutely deserve the greatest recognition, the greatest compensation, the greatest career paths, who executive communication is going to be something they're not great at. And in a bygone era, we might have had that as a disqualifier to major career growth. My view is it shouldn't be a disqualifier anymore, because we have to change our mindset of what the characteristics are of a leader in the future and not apply the same orthodoxy, not apply the same view that, frankly, for many of us is the view of looking in the mirror. We can't apply that same view to the future.
Maybe people should do more coffee chats. That's my way of being present with you right now. So I want to close with one question. And I asked a few people when I told them that we were going to talk. Thanks, by the way, for doing this and responding so quickly. It blew my mind when you responded. I have a lot of appreciation for everything you get all the time. And so what I want to ask you is, and someone suggested this question, I loved it, is 6 months out, how do you see the world?
The world will be more virtual. the world will be more understanding of the power and, frankly, criticality of digital to our collective future. The world will be more anxious, which is something we're all going to have to deal with. And with more anxiety, maybe the world may be more risk averse in both personal ways and business ways. I think the world will be optimistic about the future, or at least on the way to being optimistic about the future. And maybe that's Dan's eternal optimism, shining through. And what that means for society and for business is, all those things put together, there are going to be more old business models that get shattered and more new business models that emerge at a much more rapid pace. And, healthcare is an obvious place where that is going to happen. I would argue education is an obvious place where that will happen. But I think you will see major business transformation before we go. The last thing, Robert, I know you want to close, that I wanted to share
I'm here as long as you're here. I'm not going anywhere.
Given the show's name of Mr. IoT, I want to share with you a sort of leadership thing I think about that is very IoT-like. Is I like to think that the best leaders are thinking about leadership of things, or Internet of leadership. And what do I mean by that? It's that IoT, part of the brilliance is you have sensors arrayed throughout the world, and you can interrogate those sensors at a particular time and see what they're telling you. And those sensors are going to always feed back information to you. And the beautiful thing about those sensors is they're not applying judgment, and they're not nervous about giving you the data. They're just giving you the data. And I think the best leaders have the widest array of sensors in their organization and the world. And as I think about myself, I'm always challenging, do I have enough sensors that aren't based on a management hierarchy, but that are based on being able to interrogate a wide variety of the people in my world to get real unfiltered information back? And when those sensors are seeing things that are anomalous, are they going to feed it directly to me? And people are surprised by how much time I spend with staff and how much time I spend with people who don't look like they're in the organizational hierarchy. It's all because I want the vibrance of a great IoT-like sensor network to be helping me be an effective leader.
I always say I find it funny how we call it the Internet of Things. We never call it the Internet of People. I think we're going to go back to the Internet, and I love what you're talking about, having more sensors and people around you, the more the better, and take things from there. I want to say thanks, and you being Georgetown's sports announcer, can I ask you to close the show instead of me, so someone actually finally gets the true professional experience of an announcer to close our show?
It's been a wonderful conversation here from Robert Schmidt's couch and Dan Helfrich's office. It's been Coffee Chat with Mr. IoT. Back next week for a much more interesting guest.
Thank you, Dan. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Coffee with Mr. IoT. To subscribe or to listen to more episodes, search for Coffee with Mr. IoT in your favorite podcatcher, or find us online at deloitte.com/us/coffee with Mr. IoT. To watch the video version of our show, go to YouTube and search Coffee with Mr. IoT.